Okay, well, I think this is a great starting point, John. I can see you're already, eager to dive in. So I'll start. I'll try to moderate this conversation and jump in at
You know
the
I'm
end.
impossible to
I think
moderate,
first
Shilin.
I think before we talk about more about the program, I'm sure the audience is very interested about essentially your experience, why you're here, why we're doing this. So let's start with essentially your experience. I think one of the very unique characteristics that you bring to UChicago and Harris and Booth is because you were a very successful practitioner. You were a successful businessman, manager in different types of settings before becoming a professor back in the academia. So tell us a little bit more about how your leadership journey has evolved before you becoming a professor.
Sure, no. I will tell the story, and if I drone on, shut me up. Because I could go on and on and on, I suspect. So, but here's the reasonably quick version. So I started my sort of proper professional career, after college. In fact, after an aborted PhD. So I actually started a PhD in American politics at the University of Virginia in my early 20s. And for a variety of reasons I won't bore you with now, I decided it wasn't for me. At least not at that time and that place. Ultimately, obviously, I did end up getting a PhD, but I took this, rather lengthy detour into the world of management. So I started working in public sector consulting. So I did work for Arthur Andersen, a company that back in the late 90s and well before was very well regarded. And again, depending on the audience I'm talking to, if you're my age or thereabouts, Arthur Andersen. There's sort of this sort of famous, well regarded consulting, audit, and advisory and accounting firm that ultimately had some made some ethical mistakes that drove them rightly into bankruptcy. I had nothing to do with that, but I am very glad I don't teach accounting. So I was exposed to public sector consulting, which was incredibly exciting and frustrating at the same time, right? I did work for the Department of Housing and Urban Development on their behalf. I did work with what was then the INS within the Department of Justice, and it was exciting to have an opportunity to be someone in the private sector acquiring sort of deep domain expertise in things like business process reengineering, how to make sort of various processes within organizations more efficient. And in the late 90s was the rise of sort of the first dot-com era, and new technologies, and sort of be part of starting to roll those out at scale. So I at that time, sort of late 90s, there was a real drive among many of us who were sort of ambitious and wanted to go sort of conquer the corporate world, as you might say, to shift to the software industry, right? So I ended up making a move from Arthur Andersen to a company called MicroStrategy. They were an interesting company and still are an interesting company. Any of you may have heard of Mike Saylor. If you know anything about Bitcoin, he's become quite famous as being a Bitcoin maximalist. He was the founder and CEO of MicroStrategy. I went to MicroStrategy and became a data warehousing person. They hired specifically liberal arts undergrads who had done well as liberal arts undergrads, right? And put them through a very rigorous 3 to 4 month training program where you took an exam at the end of each week on the technical material you're learning, and you were fired if you didn't pass it. I think you got a second attempt once, but so the class was diminishing in size over those 3 months. But it really took me from sort of 0 to 60, such that I suddenly had this sort of deep domain expertise in an arena I never frankly thought I would have, right? I went from being a liberal arts grad, my undergrad is in psychology, working in management consulting, doing business process reengineering stuff, and suddenly I'm a data warehousing guy. Suddenly I'm learning to code SQL. Suddenly, I can do data modeling, and it was kind of, I'll loop back to why this is important later. Did that. Then I ended up making a shift to a startup, which I think was a tremendous experience. And one of the things I'm certainly going to advocate is sort of the importance of, I think, early in one's career, making moves sort of horizontally, right? I think exposure to different kinds of organization, public sector, private sector, ideally in different verticals, ideally also in different countries, if you've got the ability to geographically move, is you build an incredibly well-rounded skill set. Now, at the time, was I doing intentionally? No, I got lucky in some sense. But so I worked at this company, Market Switch, where suddenly I'm in a startup, and suddenly I'm wearing lots of different hats, and suddenly I'm being asked to fly to Japan and manage an international joint venture. I'm 27, 28. I don't know. I've never been to Japan. I don't know. I'm by no means an expert on Japanese culture, but at the startup, no one else knew any better, and I had a funny accent and 2 passports, and that seemed to be, sufficient qualification to say, well, you can probably go figure it out, right? So, I think, so there was this element, how do I very quickly become conversant with the particulars of Japanese culture, both as a visitor in Japan, but also as someone who was then hosting very senior executives from Japanese firms. So small startup in America had multiple international joint ventures with, like NTT Docomo was one of them, right? So these are large companies, and I'm suddenly the point person for this. Did a good job of that. Was then asked, hey, why don't we build a European operations? We're an American software firm selling advanced analytics. Again, I can go into the details later, primarily to telcos and banks and credit card companies, moved in some other areas later. So Capital One was a big customer of ours in the US. Wells Fargo was another one. These are both companies that at that time were on the bleeding edge of decision making. They were very, very good at marketing optimization. And we had a software solution, this company Market Switch, that was ultimately acquired by Experian, was really on the bleeding edge. And I kind of volunteered to go and build the European operations. And what was interesting, right, is I can spin that as, look at me, I'm really important. I built the European operations, right? That's one spin I might put in a job interview. The truth is, it was me initially, me in a rented office space in a London suburb, looking to hire people, looking to grow the organization, making phone calls to senior executives or sending emails to senior executives and saying, you haven't heard of me, you haven't heard of our company, you haven't heard of what our company does, but it's really valuable. Would you give me an opportunity to make that pitch? And it was, I think, an incredibly rewarding few years of just seeing how you get things done in the real world. So I went from sort of that to then I was recruited by a large software firm called Siebel. Siebel was sold a few years later while I was there to an even larger software firm, Oracle. So they were bought for $5.6 billion. It wasn't like Siebel was a little company. They were a big company, bought by an even bigger company. And then I sort of went through the various stages of being a salesperson, right? First with a technical focus, then later more with an account management focus. And I was in sales for Siebel and Oracle. And it was eye-opening to kind of see the 2 sides of sales as it was then, which is one, I'm selling on behalf of a small company you haven't heard of, does something really neat, very expensive, but the ROI is compelling. Please, please, please give me a meeting. To now suddenly I'm at Oracle, where I can get any meeting I want, because if you're a Fortune 500, you're a huge client of Oracle and you take Oracle seriously. I could get a meeting with any CIO or CIO's team with relative ease. The challenge now was to ensure that I got invited back, ensure that they saw value in me as a trusted advisor. And it was, a really, really exciting sort of time in my life. At that time, I then decided, you know what, I want to round out my education. As I say, I dropped out of this PhD in earlier in my career. I always had this sort of burning desire to get back to academia in some manner. I don't know that I was sure I'd ultimately get a PhD. In some sense, it felt like that ship perhaps had sailed, and I was enjoying and being successful in the world of management. I enjoyed international exposure. And I ended up deciding, you know what, I'm going to get an executive MBA. So as a sales and marketing person, I decided that, well, I want to go to the hardest, most quantitative program I can get myself into. You know, I want to leave open the possibility of pivoting to investment banking, or going back to consulting in a more senior role. Now, among friends and speaking candidly, I think I was probably chasing a little bit of prestige, right? A little bit of status. And so the conversations I'm happy to have in Shanghai or offline and more casually are ones that where, are you sure you should be chasing things like status? Why do you want this role? Because in some sense, the role at Oracle was among the most rewarding I ever had. but I was a salesperson, and that didn't impress people at a cocktail event. So I got the executive MBA. I had offers to go to Deutsche Bank in equity research, which was a pretty sought after role at the time. I also got an offer from Accenture, large global consultancy, to come in as a direct admit partner. So I went to Accenture. I was a partner at Accenture managing large projects, mainly in the US, mainly in the pharmaceutical space, but I did some work with US Steel and a couple other clients. And at this point, I think I was enjoying my executive MBA so much at UChicago that I realized for me, I wanted to see if I could get back permanently to academia, and from academia continue to sort of do what I always wanted to do, which is educate, right? Which is train and sort of help others navigate the path I had taken to be reasonably successful executive. I don't want to overplay it, right? The reality is, yes, compared to a PhD student who gets their PhD at 26, right? I had a lot of experience. But on the other hand, I started my PhD at 35, right? I didn't start it at 50. So I started my PhD at 35, spent 5 years as a PhD student at Booth, got my PhD, taught at Booth for a number of years, and then was lured over to the public policy school at Harris. So, in part because Harris recognized, and a credit to the former dean, Kate Baker, and the deputy deans, a recognition that Harris was becoming a renowned policy school, but with an emphasis on data, right? Quantitative stuff, right? And then let's be very clear, that matters. I don't want to suggest in any way I disagree with data matters. But I think what I brought to the table for Harris was a recognition that the real world is much more complicated than that. It's very easy to model a transaction in Excel, right? It's very easy to see what the ROI is on acquiring this company or divesting ourselves of this part of our business, right? But managing teams, managing transactions is messier. The solution isn't always run another regression, right? The answer often is, we know what to do, now we've got to do it, right? But we've got to do it through flesh and blood human beings who are complicated, who get sick, who go through divorces, whose children are struggling at school, right? Yeah, as a manager, as a leader, you've got to figure out, how do I work with these people? And then as you're at a certain level of seniority and or global exposure, how do I do this when I'm managing a team of people from very different cultures, right? So how do I manage a team where I'm working with Ghanaians and Nigerians and Saudi nationals, right? And Singaporeans and folks from Hong Kong and mainland China and the US and the UK. And I've kind of carved out for myself a very exciting role where I teach audiences from undergrads at UChicago to advanced management program students at Booth, who are typically mid 40s to late 50s, right? Very, very senior execs. and then everything in the middle, right? So whether it's a 25-year-old Harris student, a 28-year-old Booth student, a 35-year-old Oxford MBA or executive MBA student. And I don't want to say I'm unique, but there are very few people teaching in academia who have exposure to such a broad swath of people from such an interesting set of backgrounds. And I consider myself very, very lucky to have made that pivot to academia, where I still get to do what I love to do, which is empower other people to be successful in the world of leadership and management. Hopefully that wasn't too long and rambling, Shilin.
I think that's very, useful context for essentially for people to get to know you at a very detailed level in terms of, because essentially what you're teaching is not only the theory or the knowledge, right? What you're teaching is also a package of what you've experienced and what you as a practitioner have learned and done,
Yes,
and then
exactly.
how the theory and knowledge integrates with that. And I think the other very important thing for the audience to know is, because of the fact that John teaches such a wide range of audience, actually I'm curious, this is maybe my follow-up question here. I assume there's some universal principles, or the how we put together this International Leadership Credential program. Essentially, you teach a lot of the knowledge with to target to different audience, and this maybe relates to what Hasham was asking about. This program, we focus on early professionals, especially who want to or interested in working in an international setting, whether it's an international company, an international organization, or with cross-cultural team members, especially given right now a lot of companies do remote work. So essentially, probably, among your team members, you have someone who is from another different cultural background. And as you said, you as the practitioner and the professor, integrates a lot of resources together to get things done, right?
Yeah.
So I'm curious, as part of this ILC program and your teaching portfolio, what are the key anchoring principles or kind of knowledge base that, particular for a younger population, thinking about their leadership development, what are some of the keywords or principles that you can share with the audience?
No. So let me start from this standpoint, right? So I teach a range of different audiences that are more similar, not identical, right? But more similar than you might suspect, right? I think one of the things that I found, I'm 50, right? I just turned 50. And I think there's a sense in which you just naturally assume that as you get older and wiser, I'm not sure about that, older, right? More experience, right? There's an assumption that we naturally get better at a whole host of different things, right? I'm going to get better at decision making. I'm going to get better at leading, better at negotiating, get at managing. These are all just things that one just acquires like through osmosis over the years. And I'm completely disabused of that notion, right? The reality is that lots of the skills that are important to be successful are trainable skills, and ones that can be trained earlier in one's career than you might think. Right. So, for instance, to a group like this, I'm going to say, I'm going to teach negotiations. Right. Now, negotiations has sort of connotations that are transactional, right? Negotiation is, oh, that's like buying a used car, right? That's like selling my condo, my flat, right? And I'm going to say, look, no. I want to broaden the remit of what is a negotiation. Any difficult conversation with one or more others with whom there's a healthy degree of respectful disagreement can be framed and approached as a negotiation, right? Fundamentally, you get nothing done in the professional world without being able to think through how to act with and through others, right? So I'm going to say negotiation is a really important topic, but the way it's often taught is in a very sort of siloed, very narrow manner. What I mean by that is academia, I'm sure you all have enough sense of this already, I suspect, is very, very siloed. Think of how universities are organized. We have a policy school and a business school and a medical school. We have a department of sociology and a department of economics and a department of anthropology, right? As if the world of things neatly falls into these very distinct sort of categories. And that's not how the world works at all. Again, I'm not saying there isn't a role for specialization. So again, I don't want to sound like I'm contradicting myself. Sometimes it makes sense to specialize, but management is not a specialized skill, right? Managing and leading requires bringing lots of different domains together. So just to pick on one that I teach strategy, I teach leadership, I teach decision making, I teach negotiation. But negotiation often is taught by people who are purely psychologists, right? So they're going to teach you sort of how do brains process different information, how can you use an understanding of that to kindly take advantage of the person you're negotiating with, how can you kind of frame things in a way that their brain's going to process in a manner that may be to your advantage. How can you guard yourself about being taken advantage by the person across the table, right? And that's really important. And lots of that's very important. So if any of you have read like the book Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, who Nobel Prize winner, died a couple of weeks ago. I mean, he was 90, but wrote this book Thinking Fast and Slow, which is how do we apply behavioral science to the world of business and policy, right? There's lots of stuff in there that's really, really important, but it doesn't tell the whole story, right? The reality is a typical MBA negotiations class is going to fixate on, what does psychology tell me to do at the negotiating table? And I'm going to make the argument that, yeah, that matters. But you know what else matters? Are the right people at the table, right? Are you talking, I'm negotiating with Isabel. I'm going to pick on Isabel because you spoke eloquently and I have something in common with you. So I'm talking to Isabel and she's representing herself as being the decision maker. So, but I could get wrapped up in, well, how am I going to negotiate with her effectively? But miss the fact that, in fact, she's not the right person for me to negotiating with. She's actually pretending, literally, to be more important, more senior, and a decision maker when she is, in fact, not one, right? How might I start to think about, as I look at a complex organization, where does Isabel sit in that organization? Can I look at an org chart? Can I infer an org chart? Or can I literally Google Baird's org chart and see where Isabel sits? Or can I start to think about within the world in which Isabel works, can I understand who of her peers defer to her, trust her, went to college with her, were in the same sorority perhaps, right? Can I start to build sort of, if you will, an institutional understanding of Isabel and the organization she's part of, right? And you marry that with my sort of behavioral science. So I'm a big believer in drawing upon a range of different disciplines to solve management problems, right? So we're going to draw on economics. We're going to draw on org theory, which is largely from the domain of sociology. We're going to draw on psychology, brains matter. We're also going to talk about cultural differences, right? All of which are important, in order to get things done, right? Essentially, the punchline, I think, to what I teach is how do you get things done, right? How do you get things done? You draw on a variety of different domains and learn to sort of piece various things together to move initiatives forward.
Mm-hmm. Great. And if I can add, I think, from the side that I bring to this program and what I want to make sure that our participants of ILC connect themselves with this bigger mission of things, right? How to get things done is through essentially positioning yourself in a very authentic way as you position yourself as a leader, as you position yourself as a team supporter, because I really think sometimes leadership is a skill set combined. Sometimes it's a mindset that you have to essentially make peace with yourself about, essentially it's not a forced decision. It is a decision that you want to jump in as a leader, because that means taking more responsibilities, more risks, and more vulnerable in many ways. So I came from as you probably people can tell, but from my name and look, I come from an international background, originally from China. So as I was transitioning from China to the US, and that later I became a professional coach, I realized something similar to what John just mentioned, that, with my coaching clients, even though they look so different based on their, again, demographic, age, or their professional experience, but there's some common themes that people are just always get anxious about, people are not sure about, especially if there's something higher stake outside that represent, for example, how others perceive you, how you feel in the group. People get scared. And I think many of the times it's because you haven't made that clear decision and determination yet of what you want to get out of this for yourself. So I think John talks a lot about this external view of, for example, how did we measure success, the effectiveness within the organization. I'm gonna, come in to say essentially, yes, that's very important. At the same time, how you can see yourself thriving as you achieve all of those great things as a leader for others. The fundamental thing is to be authentic leader that speak to your own value, and that's the sustainable way. So I think with John and myself, being in the classroom with you all together, leveraging our not only the experience in terms of the teaching, but also the real essentially stories and experience from many other people that John has taught or worked with. This is a very interesting experience, and this is a very, I would say, highly immersive experience. But because we're gonna stay 2 weeks together in Shanghai, and we're gonna do a lot of things within the classroom, outside the classroom together. And for some of you, maybe this may be your first time, going to China or Shanghai or doing this type of program. So I'm sure there are a lot of exciting, experience that we can co-create as a group together.
No, I mean, let me riff on that a little bit, Shilin. I think this is a really important piece, right? So I teach, as I say, many different audiences, but also in very different structures, right? So most of my teaching at UChicago is in your traditional meet once a week for 3 hours, right? And my students like my class. I think I'm a pretty good teacher, but it's a block in time each week. And of course, I have office hours and I talk to students before and after class, but I'm never immersed with them, right? I'm not sat literally breaking bread day in, day out. When I teach at Oxford, I teach in a much more modular. So I teach the EMBA negotiations class and the MBA class. So I go and spend typically 2 weeks at the start of the summer, 2 weeks at the end of the summer at Oxford in the UK. And I am literally at dinner with these students. I'm at lunch, I'm at dinner, day in, day out. And I don't feel embarrassed to admit, and I don't think this suggests I'm not a good teacher, is I think the real valuable stuff actually occurs outside the classroom, right? It's the conversations that pick up on something that really spoke to a student in the classroom. And now we get a one-on-one conversation or a three-on-one conversation. Later at night, it's a little more private, a little more intimate, and we can dig deeply into some of this stuff. And also, frankly, I can see if I can help you personally, right? I have a large network around the world. I'm very often, helping my students secure roles through my network, right? I can't obviously promise I can do that for those of you who are looking to make career pivots, but I've got a reasonably good track record of, you want to move into this space. I can't promise you a job, but I can get you a meeting with someone senior who will give you attention and talk through, how this might play out. So yeah, Shilin and I are going to be there full time for those 2 weeks, and I'm really excited about it.
Great. All right. I think we talked a lot. I want to make sure that for our audience, do you have any, questions or things that you want to just dig a little bit more based on what we shared? So I want to open the space for the audience, and feel free to just unmute yourself, and then just grab the mic.
I do have a question right off the bat. So John, it was about something you said. I think it might have been at Arthur Andersen, one of your early roles, how they only hired liberal arts students, then gave them technical training.
That was MicroStrategy. MicroStrategy.
MicroStrategy.
Okay. Yeah. They explicitly hired liberal arts grads.
That is awesome. Well, I was wondering if you could talk about, like, based on that experience, and then also as a professor, do you think that liberal arts students are specially equipped to be able to maybe layer what they were taught in their undergrad, be it with these technical skills that are so essential in the job? And if you were to give advice to a young, I mean, I have undergrad behind me, but
No.
these business programs in undergrad are so popular. Do you feel like students are better equipped for the professional world if they do have that liberal arts foundation?
Yeah, no, it's so Isabel, I'm literally in the midst of this. I have a 16-year-old. I have a high
Oh,
school
wow.
junior who is
Very
trying to
relevant.
figure out what comes next. Now, is he going to listen to his dad? Probably not, right? But it doesn't mean I'm not going to try and give him advice, right? And it's a great question, right? I'm of the mindset that we've gone too far down the path of specialization, right? Deep skills. There's a reason I came to the US for undergrad, right? So I went to a small liberal arts college, Vassar in upstate New York, studied psychology, but obviously in the American format, studied lots of different things that I found intriguing. And I don't know, at the time, I recognized how it was going to pay dividends. So again, was I lucky? Maybe. But I did recognize that I didn't want to stay in the UK, right? The UK system was pick a subject and study it for 3 years. And if you change your mind, go back to the beginning and do it all over again, right? And the reality is, in my teens, I had all manner of things that intrigued me and still do, right? I was interested in law, I debated medicine, maybe engineering, maybe public policy, business. I was all over the map. And I feel like looking back, I don't think I should apologize for that, right? So my answer is, and AI is, I think, further confirmed my thinking on this, right? So I think liberal arts undergrad is a incredibly compelling direction to go, right? I think having exposure to a range of topics, being able to read across a vast domain of arenas and see those connections, right? I'm a huge believer in connecting the dots across conceptual domains, right? And what I'm teaching in my class is to essentially take that very mindset into the professional world, right? So I'm not only am I against getting a specialized degree unless you're very committed to, I need to be a biochemist, right? But I would say for the overwhelming majority of students who aspire to a general management role in the public, private, social sector, I would much more encourage you to pursue a balanced liberal arts degree. And if you are going to specialize later, or don't specialize at all, right? Because people say, well, I'll get an MBA later and specialize in business. I would actually say an MBA should not be a specialized degree, right? Nor should an MPP, right? Or an MPA, right? My sense is for leadership, people aspiring to leadership roles, you want to be long-term greedy. Don't be so anxious to climb the corporate ladder. Don't be so anxious to specialize. Look to be able to tie different things together, right? An MBA is a clearer way of articulating this than an MPP. So let me sort of use an MBA, right? An MBA isn't supposed to train you to be an expert in these various disciplines, right? You're deluding yourself. You think you're going to do a 2-year MBA and walk away as expert in accounting and supply chain optimization and corporate finance and such, and marketing, right? What you are being trained to do is see how these various pieces of an organization connect together so that you can adeptly manage cross-functional teams. So you can successfully rise to a general management role and understand how all the various pieces of the puzzle fit together. I talk to a lot of senior, so another way of answering this, right, is I talk to a lot of senior executives, right, who are hiring Booth or Harris to come in and run expensive programs, right? So, high ROI, don't get me wrong, right? Very worth the investment, but expensive, right? We're going to bring 50 executives to Chicago for a week of training, right? That isn't cheap, right? The opportunity cost to take flying these people to Chicago, taking them away from their day jobs, big investment. Nearly always the ask from those senior executives paying the bill for those things is make my people more T-shaped. This is a term I'll talk about in class, but the quick version of it is I've got too many specialists and not enough generalists who can see how the enterprise fits together, right? So my advice to young students is make these lateral moves, conquer different domains of knowledge. Will your career perhaps move slower in your 20s and maybe even early 30s than those anxious to climb the corporate ladder and specialize? Probably, but you're going to crush the competition at that inflection point in a career that occurs. The research is really interesting on this. Essentially, specialization gets you to about 32. Beyond that, all bets are off. Well, beyond that, being a specialist doesn't matter, doesn't give you additional returns. Right? At 32, what matters is your ability to wield social capital, the ability to step back and see how domains of knowledge, disparate parts of organizations fit together, and use that knowledge to mentor people, identify high performers, identify decision makers, and such. So that was a long answer to your question, but hopefully a good one.
Well, thank you for weighing in, and I really do like your approach. It strikes me as so obvious that it's important at a young age to develop those critical thinking skills that come with being in the liberal arts, but I find myself in the minority always whenever this question arises in the professional place. So thank you for weighing in. Very refreshing, John.
I made reference to AI, right? I don't know how much you're exposed to ChatGPT, Gemini, Claude. If you're not, you should, right? And I don't mean just dabble with it. Like, spend the $20 on OpenAI for a month and play with ChatGPT 4.0. It's mind-blowing how good at various tasks these LLMs have become, right? And until you really play with it and try and force it to do things that you struggle with day to day, or see how quickly it can do things that might take you hours, it's mind-boggling, right? But I'm 50. I can perhaps cruise to the finish line without worrying too much, maybe. You guys can't, right? You need to grapple with, how do I include the reality of LLMs in my day-to-day work? How do I think about the opportunities for people I'm hiring that are maybe going to be diminished, right? Think of entry-level work that may have been done by a fresh grad from Wisconsin, right? From Illinois, from Chicago, right? A lot of that stuff, right? A newly minted law student, a lot of that stuff that you kind of cut your teeth with, you learn skills, can now be pushed off onto an LLM, right? That's good, and it's bad, right? And in fact, I'm actually writing a book on this topic right now, which is, how is the workplace shifting, right? There are a variety of forces that are making us feel lonely at work. We're feeling disconnected. Technology is part of the story. Remote work is part of the story, but a whole host of others that are part of the story. And I'm in the midst of writing. The book's 18 months away probably, but I'm acutely interested in this topic. And AI, I think, speaks to, why would you go and get a degree in computer science right now? Unless you really want to go work at Google or OpenAI, right? But if you're thinking, I'm just going to get a computer science degree to be pretty good at coding Python, why? ChatGPT can code Python effortlessly. Is it optimized? Is it as good as a dedicated CS grad? No. Is it good enough for most of us? Oh yes. So I think, this ability to be a liberal arts grad is going to deepen over time, right? But the ability to bring in AI, like, how do you think of AI as a partner in decision making? I teach decision making, right? 5 years ago, it was, how do I bring different people together, encourage them to come to a better individual decision, then pool their knowledge, and then ultimately as a group make an even better decision. Well, now it's like, how do I bring AI into the mix, right? 2 years ago, it was, I want to bring AI in, but I want to supervise AI so that I get a better decision. But the human is probably the final arbiter. Now we're in an interesting dilemma, and this is just one domain, right? Is that, for radiology, looking at scans of, is this a cancerous tumor or a blip on the image? What we're learning is AI is now better at that, to the degree that a friend of mine who's one of the top oncological radiologists in Illinois is telling me that med school grads aren't electing to go into radiological roles, because their attitude is, why would I invest 4 or 8 years of my life in this when it's going to be done by an LLM? Great if it works out. What if it doesn't? We then literally don't have radiologists. So I'm sorry, I'm starting to ramble a little bit, but the point I think I'm trying to make, Isabel, I hope, is that this ability to stay conversant across a vast swath of material never goes away, right? Never goes away. And I'm pleased that because of my technical background from 99, 2000, that I'm pretty comfortable with deep tech, right? And that's pretty important. Anyway, I'll stop rambling.
Well, looking forward to the book.
Good.
Perfect. Any other questions? Yeah, I mean, John and I were deep believers in generalists, because that's essentially how both of us started our professional journey, and we benefit a lot from being a generalist, and we really look forward to bring all we have as as an instructor, but also as a supporter during and beyond this program with you. So we really appreciate your time. I know we're gonna hit our end mark here. I want to make sure that there are no chat. I think there's just a quick chat question coming in from Cheryl. Really like the idea of connecting dots. How much of the status quo of the current day international leadership position opportunity? Cheryl, do you wanna just this is a great question. Do you want to also just share a little bit about, I don't know if you can unmute yourself and share a little bit about yourself, and then John, we can jump in.
Oh, thank you for this sharing. I really feel inspired, because definitely working in the education area, I don't have a lot of position or opportunity, as John has shared earlier. But I'm really interested in this leadership idea to be able to empower me to go to this kind of management role, or even to have more leading strategies that which I can incorporate in my professional days. So we'd like to understand if there any sharing about the current maybe work experience, or current current
job market.
Yeah.
Yeah, how
yeah, go ahead.
Yeah. I can start because I just realized that we haven't mentioned another key feature of this ILC program is, besides spending time with John and myself, we're also having a series of what we call career seminar with industry experts, speakers. So actually we're bringing together a group of 7 different speakers from 7 different organizations, ranging from, for example, as you can imagine, big corporations internationally speaking, to, for example, World Bank, International Labor Organization, again, across different sectors. And they're all very established professionals who are very eager to share about not only their career path, but also essentially how, when they hire people, what are the key, again, values, things that they're looking for, what are the tips that they have. So on a daily basis, we will have a session, whether on Zoom or in person in the classroom, a session of sharing. And we believe that, again, that's versatility that you have to hear directly from a wide range of speakers is very important for you to think about multiple options for yourself, right? I think, Cheryl, if I understand your position correctly, you may think about pivoting to a different industry or type of a different role, maybe from an individual contributor to a management position. Again, those are the things that we need to make sure that you have a wide range of databases and data points so that you can make a well-informed decision. So that is definitely one thing that we want to make sure that you can benefit from this 2-week program. John, anything else you want to add in this question?
I've spoken enough already, Shilin. I think that was a great answer. Yeah, I think it's important to point out we're bringing others, right? So yes, I think we both have a lot to add, but obviously there are lots and lots of other people, and I think we're going to get a nice mix of kinds of organizations, levels of experience, right? Sometimes it's good to listen to people at the top who are 20 years in.
Right.
Sometimes it's really good to hear from people who are a few years in, right? Because maybe
Yeah.
they're more directional. I think we're trying to balance the two of these. It's not all about hearing the war stories from the 50-year-old guy, right? Or gal, right? I think there's a lot to say. That person who's 5 years ahead of you, 10 years ahead of you can often be just as important.
Yes.
Thank you so much,
Great.
Shilin, John, for the answering my question. Thank you.
Thank you.
Perfect. All right. If no more further questions, we really appreciate your time being with us. We really hope to see you and hang out together in Shanghai this summer with you. Myself and my team, we're gonna follow up with you through email. So if you want to have a quick individual chat, and I know we didn't talk too much about the admissions process, all the logistics, everything can be available on our website, and we're gonna make sure that we send you a lot of good information. And also, we're gonna send you this recording so that if anything that you wanna take a little bit better look, feel free to start it from there. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you in person